Hello, my name is Lisa Bridle and I work at the Community Resource Unit on the Families for Inclusive Education project. CREW exists to promote positive change in the lives of people with disability so they can belong to and contribute to community life. Because of our mission, inclusive education has been a long-term priority for our organisation because we see that kids growing up together in their local communities and in their neighbourhood schools provides the best foundation for a rich, included life in community. That's why we were delighted a little over 12 months ago to be funded by the Queensland Department of Education to run workshops and webinars and online learning, to produce resources, provide individual consultations for families who are pursuing an inclusive education for their sons and daughters with disability. Our project aims to help families of students with disability to be clear, informed, confident and connected so they can build their advocacy skills to more effectively communicate and work alongside their children's schools. Another big priority of the project has been the development of peer support networks and training peer support contacts so they can provide ongoing support to other families. Today I'm going to be sharing some of the ideas, the feedback really, that families have given us over the last 12 months and previously in other areas of CREW's work about what they feel as families would make a positive difference to their relationships with their schools. I'm also going to be drawing on my own experiences as a parent of a now 25-year-old son with an intellectual disability, and some of our experiences, both positive and negative, and what would have improved our experience in partnering with our school. So I guess to this audience it comes as no surprise that collaboration, partnership, communication, consultation with families is really an expectation of our Australian school system and in particular of our Queensland school system through the Parent and Community Engagement Framework. And I guess today I'm going to be mostly talking about decision-making, communication, partnership, those kind of areas of the framework. But I'm going to actually start by talking about school culture because families tell us a lot of times that their relationships with their school would be better if they felt welcomed from the start, if they felt that their child was seen and supported in an inclusive way in that school community. So I think school culture is a good place to start. So I just want to put up some indicators of what an inclusive school kind of might be. So families often prompt us with ideas about needing to feel that there's an interest in their child as a unique individual, not as just kind of one of the unit kids or one of the kids with one of the verified kids, if you like. They want to feel that staff are open to figuring things out. So they want to hear staff talk about how things can happen, not if or why things are definitely ruled out. Families pick up on whether there is a culture of openness and professional learning and collaboration, or really whether it's kind of everyone's kind of working in isolation without that kind of whole school approach. Many families tell us that they really value where there is already diversity in the school. They feel and where that is valued. They feel that makes an easier road for their student with disability. And I guess they aren't just aiming for the student to be there at the school, but really for that student to have opportunities to shine, to really be seen for their gifts and to really be able to contribute and participate fully in the life of the school. So that doesn't tell you the hard work of how to get there, but I'm hoping that some of the other ideas I introduce might speak to that issue. Before we do that, I think it's worth us reflecting on what does a collaborative relationship feel like and look like. So this is actually a question that we've been asking parents in our workshops, and the things they tell us are that being a valued partner rests on their child being seen as valued first and foremost. They want to feel as parents that they're not judged, that their motives aren't under suspicion. They want to feel like their input is not just tolerated in formal settings, such as an ICP meeting, but really encouraged and welcomed and invited. They want to feel like when there is disagreement, that they're not drowned, their voice isn't drowned out. They want to actually have the kind of relationship with their school where there can be really robust discussion, and that maybe people can even tread on each other's toes, but there's forgiveness and there's goodwill. They want to feel like they can relate to members of the school as a human being and be treated as a human being themselves, not just kind of seen through that role of parent, teacher, parent, principal. And they want to feel like they can be more relaxed, rather than tense all the time about what's coming next. So maybe some of those feelings or descriptions also rest true for you. At Crew, for us, the natural authority of the family is absolutely paramount. So Michael Kendrick tells us that families have a natural authority because they're usually the ones who love and care the most about the person with a disability. In the school context, families will have known the child the longest and fullest. They know the medical history, they know the therapies that have been attempted so far, what has and hasn't worked. They know the child in a whole range of different contexts, and they've known the child for the longest period of time, and they'll continue to know the child into their future. Because they love and care about the child the most, they have less vested interests. They're not as interested usually in just kind of a short-term solution, but something that will really bear fruit in the long term. And in the end, we should respect families because they'll be the ones who will live with the consequences of system decisions. So it's a reality for people with disability that they survive a rotating door of professionals over their lifespan, and all well-meaning, all with lots of kind of good advice or the next best thing, but it is families who mop up when systems get that wrong. So that's not to say that families always get it right, not at all, but it does mean that they have a viewpoint that is absolutely paramount and worth respecting and being curious about. At Crew, we think it's really important that rather than pretending that there aren't challenges in building partnerships between schools and families, that we acknowledge those and raise them to consciousness. So I want to acknowledge really that it is tricky for schools because they are busy places. It is hard to prioritise time to build relationships. For both families and schools, we bring different assumptions and histories to the relationship. For families of students with disability, it's very rare to get to the school years without having some very problematic relationships with professionals, whether that's in the medical system, when people are searching for a diagnosis, or even in the processes in entry to school. So this can create a thorniness or a suspicion from the beginning. And I suspect that if you are a teacher or a school leader who's had some pretty problematic relationships with families, you will also, despite your best intentions, bring some of that history into the relationship with subsequent parents. Families of students with disability experience discrimination and marginalisation. The research is clear on that. So they come to school often already feeling disempowered, perhaps a little bit unclear about whether they will even be welcomed by other families in their students' class, for example. And again, that can have an impact. Because of those problematic histories, the accumulation of issues and hurts can really lead to reactive advocacy by families or reactive responses by schools. And that's why I think it's really important that we're conscious of those histories and experiences so that we can do better. And I think it's just inevitable that there's actually tensions between school and home priorities. What's important for us as we're in the home environment may not be the same as the school, and that will create a tension at different points in time. So we can't necessarily do a lot about all of those challenges, but being conscious of them can make a difference. So it seems, the research tells us really clearly that relationships between school and parents is often thorny, that there's lots of feelings of hurt or mistrust on both sides. Perhaps there is a feeling, which I think these quotes from some UK researchers into parent partnerships bear out. There can be a sense from schools that parents are just out to criticise, that they don't respect the authority or the expertise of members of the educational team. And I think some of these quotes, and when I've showed them to teachers, would be, yep, that's right. I feel like this parent is telling me that I'm not up to the job when they say, I will bring in all my research on Fragile X syndrome. Perhaps there's, on the parent side, in the middle quote, have you followed up on the changes on my son's ICP that we talked about? That's just that, perhaps that history of not seeing follow through, and so really a desperate need to get that reassurance, where for the educator it feels like there's not a respectful relationship or no trust. So these are actually kind of some ideas that we're again talking about with parents, because we want parents to understand how their communication can either lead to engagement or disengagement, and we want to suggest that for educators that same dynamic is true, that we need to be kind of more careful in our use of words and our communication, so we don't create additional barriers to that task of building collaboration. So when teachers say these kind of things, parents are likely to hear that they are judged, that their child is seen differently, or that their child is treated differently. So this example, have you thought about going back to work? And I have had a parent tell me that she was asked in a meeting just whether she has ever considered taking up a hobby, because the role of advocate was kind of basically getting a little bit annoying. You're not entitled to a Rolls-Royce service. Now, this is something I've actually known that Queensland families have been told, but it's very common for people to be told that there aren't the resources that parents are requesting. And the parent response to that is really, you don't think my child is worth it. Both families and and educators will continue to say things which perhaps do create that disengagement, but it's just a message for us to be aware of the other perspective and how things that are commonly said will be perceived by the other party. So that's kind of like what we're up against, but let's look then at what might help build some effective partnerships. So parents tell us time and time again that they want to be included in the decision about how they will communicate. So it doesn't really work for parents of students with disabilities to be told, you know, I just meet my families at the parent-teacher interviews, or I'm very busy, so don't expect me to be able to reply to email except once a week. Now, that may end up being an okay kind of scenario, but it needs to be a joint decision about how frequently and the method of communication. Parents tell us that they don't want to just rely on formal meetings and processes. So, and I was thinking actually about a wonderful thing that happened when my son was entering year 2, where the new graduate, came out a week before Shawns started and jumped on the trampoline with him and played with the Lego and got to know him as a child and us as a family. And just the amazing foundation that created for a positive relationship during that school year. So sometimes those small things can make a really big difference. Families want to feel like there is a willingness to find a way, that there is flexibility. I'm probably going to repeat that message a lot. Rather than always being presented with problems and told there is nothing we can do about that because of da-da-da. We tell families not to ambush the school, and so a message for schools is not to ambush the parents. And by that I mean, don't call meetings at really short notice. Don't call meetings with a cast of thousands where many of the people at the meeting will be meeting the family for the first time and the family won't be aware even of what their roles are or what their involvement has been with their child. Don't call meetings where the agenda and the purpose hasn't been clearly shared with that family with adequate time for them to prepare. Don't place a form in front of them to say, we just need you to sign this now. Show that you see the child and not just the file. And I've been thinking back to a really amazing experience I had in the early high school years where we had an IEP meeting which was at least 80% focused on the positives. And again, really picked up on progress, picked up on Shawns' interest out of school, and just how amazing that was to enable us to have some of those trickier conversations down the track, because I was absolutely convinced that the person who led that meeting saw Shawn and valued him. We encourage families not to prejudge schools, not to assume that the school's motives are somehow wrong, and we encourage families to ask curious questions. Tell me more about that. Why are you thinking that? I want to understand that a bit more. And again, as well as inviting input from the family, it's really helpful if you don't understand why something matters a lot to a family to be curious about that and to ask them to explore that more so you really do understand. And being able to solve problems by thinking creatively rather than an approach that says, we've always done things this way, it works. It works for all our students with autism, for example. When I talked about that IEP meeting, the really positive IEP meeting, one of the a really strong message that comes from families is that when schools talk deficits about their child, it is just a killer of trust. It is a killer of relationships. And we need to break that habit of telling the deficit story. So it's somehow so ingrained in our systems and in our professional training, but it really leads nowhere good. Some stories enhance life, others degrade it. Let's be careful about the stories that we tell about students with disability. So without trust, we're nowhere in terms of building relationships. And I think that's true for all of our relationships in all of our ordinary life. For families with students with disability, because of their experiences, some of the things that will build trust is showing that you're following through. Showing that you're not just coming up with a whole lot of problems or a litany of complaints, perhaps, the whole documentation of the behavioural incidents, for example, but you're seeking solutions and you're following through on trying out things that might work. It really helps if you can acknowledge shortfalls rather than defend something that isn't good enough. So some of the things that I hear from families that happen, maybe an example where maybe the student with a disability isn't able to access the playground at the same time, but they're kind of closed in the special ed room, for example. I think we'd all have to agree that's not good enough for an inclusive education. Being able to acknowledge that and working for better is much more likely to lead to trust than is defending that situation. Don't blame the child, judge the family. And really try to empathise with the family experience. So I think when I've seen some of the correspondence that's been written about children with disability, I've often thought, has the person who wrote that correspondence ever thought about what it would be like as a parent to be on the receiving end of such negative writing about the child that they love so much? Have the people who've set up those meetings with 8 or 10 professionals around the boardroom ever thought what it would be like as a parent who's unfamiliar with those meetings to walk into such a cast of thousands? And try to understand that families of students with disability have complex lives, that they're managing a lot of appointments, they're managing care needs, they're managing a whole lot of stresses that other people cannot actually imagine. So be kind. So parents tell us that they want schools to listen, to get to know the child, to make the least dangerous assumption and keep expectations high, to value the hopes and dreams that the student and the family have, to stay optimistic about potential. So when my son was in high school, it was really clear that the school, many of the school staff saw that Shawns' future was going to be sheltered workshops and group homes. When we were asked what we saw as his future, we were talking about him moving out of home and living independently, working in open employment, having a rich social life, and going to university. Now, in fact, we were looked at blankly as if we were clearly deluded when we talked about that future. But indeed, that is the future that Shawn has lived, not the life of sheltered workshops and group homes. So I would really encourage people to aim high. There is absolutely no benefit to a person with disability about setting the bar so low or being a naysayer. Be an ally to people's dreams. and stay flexible and willing to work things out for that child. This quote from a family, I think, speaks at the heart of what we're aiming for. Please, please, please remember we're a resource. So many things could be resolved quickly if we had the opportunity to give input. Our children are the centre of our lives. Their learning and their well-being matters to us. I would like to be involved in school. It's such a big part of my kids' life. I would feel more confident about school if teachers can have more confidence in me. What I hear in that quote is absolutely the yearning of a family, a pleading to be involved. I certainly know as a parent of a child that couldn't ever tell me anything about his day, that it felt like torture sometimes to be at arm's length, to be told, we'll contact you if there's any problems. And I often got more information from standing at the school gate with other families and other kids than I did from Shawns' teachers. And I needed that. I needed to know what his day was like. So it can feel really powerless to be kept at arm's length. So I want to encourage you to recognise that yearning in families. And I want to really encourage you, particularly when tensions are high or there is disagreement, or you feel like, some of those statements that were made early in the when parents say slide or up, to step forward into that relationship rather than put up the shutters. It's a natural human tendency when conflict is high to try and kind of manage people, manage criticism, put the wall up, maybe make a directive like that parent can only communicate through that one person. But actually that's not going to help that family to feel heard. It's not going to help that family to feel less anxious about what is going on in school, to have confidence in the school. So at times when tensions are high, I would encourage you to lean into the relationship and listen more. So in that theme of being able to understand what families hope for and what they dream for, I'm just going to play a short clip of families talking about why they chose inclusive education.
There are so many reasons that we want Liam to be included. We just want his life to take an ordinary path. We want him to go to school with his siblings, the kids in our street, the kids in our local community. That's just where he belongs.
I saw my son as a human being needing to be with his peers in a regular setting. So it never occurred to me that I would look for a specific setting for him because of his condition.
We wanted her to be known by a lot of typical kids, to grow up with them, to consider herself just an ordinary person deserving of an ordinary life and whatever that brings.
I really wanted my kids to be able to go to the same school. I guess I wanted Shawn to be really known in our local community and have friends in our neighbourhood.
Yeah, well, we didn't purposefully choose inclusion to begin with. My son was going to a special school and it just wasn't really working for our family. It was a lot of travel, so we looked around for other options, and there was a mainstream school nearby that was very welcoming, and that's what we chose. It was kind of by accident. It wasn't a grand vision to begin with. It became later.
I think we spent a lot of time in Eliza's early life focused on the medical aspects of her day-to-day existence, which I think we therefore lost sight of who we were as a family. And when we had a few big medical scares, we realised that we were missing out, and Eliza was missing out on the same opportunities just to be a little girl. And I think that was a good wake-up call, because that was before kindy, before school, and we got to realise that we needed to focus on the everyday stuff and the things that every other child her same age was doing. So that was going to the pool in summer, going to the park, all those sorts of fun things, and trying to let go of focusing too much on the idea of fixing Eliza and too much on the medical stuff.
It didn't make any sense to me that Shawn needed to be removed, to be made, to be fixed, to be able to be included at a later date. It made sense for me that he would start off included as he was in our family, and that's what I found to be true.
We also know that he will do better socially, academically, included in his regular school, learning alongside his peers.
And learning about inclusion, I realised that it was just his right, that he was allowed to be in a mainstream environment with all the other kids of his age, and that he didn't actually have to earn his place to be there. He didn't have to, get certain milestones, certain development to be there. He was just allowed to be there. So, yeah.
I want to share with you a little bit about our own story. I've mentioned Shawn a little bit throughout this presentation, but I want to talk about why this matters to me. Now, Shawn left school in 2013 with a wonderful group of friends, a strong identity, the skills, I guess, to move into open employment, and with real ambitions for his own future. But it certainly wasn't easy. At its worst, our inclusive education journey meant that we were offered only 1 hour a week at the local state preschool. We were rejected from 3 high schools when we went to enrol him. We were told we were sent a bill for his support costs. We were repeatedly told that he had no friends, that he was an economic burden to the school, that he was in the wrong place because there are special places meant for special kids like him. We were told that it didn't matter what we wanted, that he would just be suspended for longer and longer periods until we had no choice but to remove Shawn from the school. Now, my husband and I aren't shrinking violets. I've worked in disability advocacy. I knew the legislation, and I was prepared to speak up for him. But it was enormously costly for us to fight for Shawn's rights. I lost a lot of sleep, as did my husband. Our work and our family life was disrupted, and it was a time of great anxiety and worry. It should not have been that hard. What we were asking for was not somehow unrealistic of that school system. And I guess I know that I was painted as a very uncooperative parent because I didn't see the good sense of removing Shawn from the school. Some might ask why I persisted. And I persisted because I always had that vision of what his life needed to look like into the future. So he now has the rich legacy of the inclusion that we fought for, including friendships with Rachel and Harriet in the photo in the middle, who he has known since he was in grade 1. He had dinner with them earlier this week. And so Shawn was worth it. I'm really pleased that we were able to fight for his inclusion, but it shouldn't have been that hard. And I do this work because I don't want it to be this hard for other families. So in conclusion, these are the things that parents tell us would make a difference in their relationship with school. For the school to set high expectations for their student. For school leaders to have a vision of an inclusive school which is shared at all levels in the school. That people expect challenges, that it's not seen as somehow a disaster or a sign that inclusion isn't working. People are prepared for challenges. That there is an absolute belief in each child and a commitment and effort to find ways that that child's gifts can be a contribution to the school. That there is a culture of forgiveness of the child, of the parent, and of the team around that child. That there is a commitment to building and repairing relationships because people will tread on each other's toes. And if schools are in doubt, that there is a redoubling of the efforts to listen, and for all of us to do better at listening to each other. So you can really make a difference. There were many, many wonderful educators and leaders who helped build the inclusive life that Shawn now enjoys, and many, many other students with disability across Queensland. And I'd encourage you to keep going with your efforts to that end. Thank you very much.